How can Saudi Arabia afford footballers' salary? Cristiano Ronaldo reportedly earns more than $200 million every single year. That's over $500,000 every day, more than $20,000 every hour, and he isn't alone. Karim, Benzema, Neymar, N'Golo Kante, Sadio Mane, Riyad Mahrez, Aleksandar Mitrovic. Within just a few years, Saudi Arabia transformed its domestic football league into one of the biggest spending competitions in world football. For millions of fans, it seemed impossible. The Premier League has the biggest television deals. Real Madrid and Barcelona have millions of supporters. Manchester City dominates English football. So how could clubs that many people had barely heard of suddenly offer contracts worth hundreds of millions of pounds? Where was this money coming from? Were these clubs somehow making billions behind the scenes? Or was something much bigger happening? The answer isn't just about football. It's about politics, economics, one of the world's richest investment funds, and a plan that could completely reshape global sport over the next decade. This is how Saudi Arabia can afford 200 million football salaries. When Cristiano Ronaldo left Manchester United in late 2022, most people believed his next destination would be Major League Soccer in America, or perhaps a return to Sporting CP. Instead, the football world was stunned. He signed for Al Nassr. Reports suggested his total annual package could exceed 200 million euros, making him one of the highest-paid athletes in history. At first, many fans dismissed it as a one-off. After all, football legends often finish their careers outside Europe. David Beckham moved to LA Galaxy. Xavi finished in Qatar. Andres Iniesta went to Japan. This looked like another farewell contract. But then something unexpected happened. Saudi Arabia didn't stop. Only months later, Karim Benzema arrived. Then N'Golo Kante. Then Roberto Firmino, Riyad Mahrez, Sadio Mane, Fabinho, Neymar, Aleksandar Mitrovic, Jordan Henderson, and dozens more. Suddenly, some of the world's biggest football stars were leaving Europe's elite leagues for Saudi Arabia. Transfer windows that once revolved around the Premier League or La Liga now revolved around Saudi clubs. For the first time in decades, Europe wasn't the only destination offering life-changing contracts. It looked as though Saudi Arabia had entered football with one simple objective: buy the biggest names in the world. But that raised an obvious question. How? Because football clubs normally can't spend money forever. Every club has limits. Manchester United generates enormous commercial revenue. Liverpool earns billions from sponsorships and broadcasting. Real Madrid consistently reports some of the highest revenues in football. Even those giants must carefully manage wages and spending. So why did Saudi clubs appear to have almost no financial restrictions? To answer that question, we need to go back several years, before Ronaldo, before Benzema, before the Saudi Pro League became global news, back to a decision made in 2016. To understand why Saudi Arabia is spending billions on football, you first need to understand one simple fact. This has never been just about football. For decades, Saudi Arabia's economy was built on one resource: oil. The country possesses some of the largest oil reserves on Earth, allowing it to generate enormous wealth over many decades. But relying too heavily on one industry creates risk. Oil prices rise, oil prices fall, technology changes, countries invest in renewable energy, demand shifts over time. Saudi Arabia knew that depending on oil forever wasn't a long-term strategy. So in 2016, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman announced an ambitious national transformation program called Vision 2030. Its goal was straightforward: reduce dependence on oil, create new industries, increase tourism, develop entertainment, expand technology, build futuristic cities, attract foreign investment, and improve Saudi Arabia's position on the global stage. Football became one piece of that much bigger puzzle. Think about it. The FIFA World Cup is watched by billions. The Premier League reaches almost every country on Earth. Football isn't simply a sport. It's one of the world's most powerful forms of global entertainment. If Saudi Arabia could become a major force in football, it wouldn't just attract players. It would attract businesses, sponsors, tourists, media attention, investment. Every time Cristiano Ronaldo steps onto the pitch wearing an Al Nassr shirt, millions of people around the world are reminded of Saudi Arabia. That's exposure that traditional advertising could never buy. But attracting the world's biggest footballers requires something even more important. Money, lots of it. And that's where the story takes another dramatic turn, because behind almost every major Saudi football investment sits one organization with financial power unlike almost anything else in the world: the Public Investment Fund. And understanding that organization explains almost everything. If Vision 2030 was the blueprint, then one organization became the engine powering it: the Public Investment Fund, better known as PIF. At first glance, PF might sound like just another government department. It isn't. The Public Investment Fund is one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world. Think of it as a giant investment company owned by the Saudi state. Instead of simply keeping the country's wealth in a bank account, PIF invests it around the world with the aim of growing that wealth over time. Its portfolio stretches across dozens of industries: technology, real estate, renewable energy, tourism, electric vehicles, gaming, airlines, infrastructure, and, increasingly, sport. PIF has invested in companies and projects across the globe worth hundreds of billions of pounds in total assets. Football is only one small part of that much larger investment strategy. But unlike many traditional investors, PIF isn't only focused on immediate profits. It also invests in projects that support Saudi Arabia's long-term economic goals. That's where football comes in. Because football doesn't just generate money, it generates attention. Every transfer, every match, every headline, every social media post featuring Cristiano Ronaldo or Karim Benzema puts Saudi Arabia in front of millions of people. Instead of buying advertising space, Saudi Arabia invested in football itself. And in 2023, that strategy became even clearer. In June 2023, Saudi Arabia announced one of the biggest changes in the history of its domestic football league. The Public Investment Fund took majority ownership of 4 of the country's biggest clubs: Al Nassr, Al Hilal, Al Ahli, and Al Ittihad. Together, these clubs became the driving force behind the Saudi Pro League's transformation. With significantly greater financial backing, they could compete for players who previously would never have considered moving outside Europe. This wasn't about trying to win one league title. It was about changing how the entire football world viewed Saudi football. Within months, the results were impossible to ignore. Cristiano Ronaldo was already there. Then Karim Benzema arrived after winning the Ballon d'Or just months earlier. Neymar joined Al Hilal. Sadio Mane signed for Al Nassr. Riyad Mahrez left Manchester City. Roberto Firmino left Liverpool. Aleksandar Mitrovic departed the Premier League. The transfer market had changed. For decades, Europe's top leagues had attracted almost every elite footballer. Now, for the first time in modern football history, another league had the financial strength to compete. Of course, money alone wasn't the only reason players moved. Some were attracted by new opportunities. Some wanted a different lifestyle. Others were approaching the later stages of their careers. But the enormous salaries made those decisions much easier. And Saudi Arabia understood something important. The more famous players joined, the more valuable the league became. Broadcasters became more interested. Sponsors paid more attention. Clubs gained millions of new followers online. Merchandise sales increased. International media coverage exploded. Each superstar signing wasn't simply a football transfer. It was a marketing campaign viewed by millions of people around the world. And Saudi Arabia had already tested this strategy before, not in Riyadh, but nearly 5,000 kilometers away in England. Before Saudi Arabia transformed its own football league, it made another move that caught the attention of the football world. In October 2021, a consortium led by the Public Investment Fund completed the takeover of Newcastle United Football Club. For Newcastle supporters, it marked the end of years of frustration under previous ownership. But outside England, many people saw something much bigger. One of the world's wealthiest investment funds now owned a Premier League club. Almost immediately, Newcastle's ambitions changed. Investment increased. The squad improved. New players arrived. The club qualified for the UEFA Champions League far sooner than many expected. Although Newcastle still had to follow the Premier League's financial rules, the takeover demonstrated something important. Saudi Arabia wasn't interested only in its domestic league. It wanted a presence in global football. The Newcastle project provided experience in running a top European club, while also increasing Saudi Arabia's influence within one of the world's most watched competitions. But football wasn't the only sport receiving attention. Saudi Arabia also invested heavily in Formula One, boxing, golf, esports, and international events, high-profile boxing fights, major Formula One races, the LIV Golf League, international gaming tournaments. All of these projects shared one common goal: position Saudi Arabia as a global destination for sport, entertainment, and business. Football simply happened to be the biggest stage of them all. At this point, you might still be asking the same question. Can Saudi Arabia actually afford to pay players hundreds of millions of pounds every year? The short answer is yes, but not because Saudi football clubs are generating enormous profits. Unlike the Premier League, where television rights and commercial revenue generate billions of pounds each season, the Saudi Pro League is still developing those income streams. Many clubs do not yet earn enough through ticket sales, broadcasting deals, sponsorships, and merchandise to cover the salaries of their biggest stars on their own. Instead, the league's rapid growth has been supported by significant investment from a traditional football business perspective. Spending this much money may seem difficult to justify, but Saudi Arabia is not treating football like a normal football business. It is treating football as a long-term investment in the country's future. The thinking is simple. If superstar players attract global audiences, those audiences create commercial opportunities. More television viewers, more sponsorship deals, more tourists, more businesses investing in Saudi Arabia, more international attention. In other words, football becomes a tool that supports much larger economic goals. Whether that strategy ultimately delivers the expected returns remains uncertain. Critics argue that the spending is unsustainable. Supporters believe the league is laying the foundations for long-term success. Only time will reveal which side is correct. One thing, however, is beyond debate. Saudi Arabia has already changed football forever, because for decades, Europe's elite leagues controlled almost all of football's financial power. Today, there is finally another serious competitor with the resources to challenge that dominance. And with the 2034 FIFA World Cup set to be hosted in Saudi Arabia, the country's investment in football is unlikely to slow down anytime soon. The biggest question now isn't whether Saudi Arabia can afford these salaries. It's whether the rest of the football world can afford to ignore what comes next. For decades, football has followed the same pattern. The biggest players wanted to play in Europe. The biggest clubs were in Europe. The biggest television audiences watched Europe. The biggest sponsorship deals belonged to Europe. Saudi Arabia is trying to change that, not overnight, but over decades. Imagine a child growing up in Riyadh today. Instead of only dreaming about playing for Real Madrid or Manchester United, they also dream about playing for Al Hilal or Al Nassr. Imagine international companies choosing to sponsor Saudi clubs because millions of fans are watching every week. Imagine young players seeing the Saudi Pro League as a genuine career destination rather than simply a place to finish their careers. That is the long-term vision, but it won't be easy. The Premier League has spent more than 30 years building its global audience. La Liga has clubs with over a century of history. The Champions League remains the biggest club competition in football. Saudi Arabia cannot buy tradition overnight. It cannot buy generations of supporters. It cannot buy history. Those things take time. The real challenge isn't attracting Cristiano Ronaldo. The real challenge is creating a league that people will still watch 20 years after Ronaldo retires. That is the true test of Vision 2030. Final chapter, the answer to the question. So, how can Saudi Arabia afford $200 million football salaries? The answer isn't that Saudi football clubs suddenly became richer than Real Madrid or Manchester City. They didn't. The answer is much bigger. Saudi Arabia is using football as part of a national investment strategy. The country's vast financial resources, channeled through the Public Investment Fund, have allowed clubs to attract some of the world's biggest stars. Those signings generate global attention. That attention supports tourism, business, entertainment, international investment, and Saudi Arabia's ambition to become one of the world's leading sporting destinations. Whether this strategy ultimately succeeds remains uncertain. Some believe the Saudi Pro League will become one of the world's biggest competitions. Others believe the spending cannot continue forever. Only time will tell. But regardless of what happens next, Saudi Arabia has already achieved one thing. It forced the entire football world to pay attention. And perhaps that was the plan all along. If you've enjoyed this documentary and want to understand the hidden business behind football, make sure to subscribe. Because in the next episode, we're answering another question that millions of fans have wondered about. Why does every football club want to own another football club? Until next time. Thank you. Thanks for watching.